That's her. That is her. Dude, Mike, it's a humongous tiger. Oh my God, dude.
Here we got her. Oh my gosh. We got her. Holy cow. The Gadorsey hog. Dude!
Welcome to the Musky Therapy Podcast. Please follow me this way. The doctor is ready to see you now. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Musky Therapy Podcast. I have got the one and only, the man, the myth, the legend, and definitely, without a doubt, a legend of the musky fishing industry, Steve Herbeck. Welcome to the show, man.
Chaz, thanks, man. It's good to be with you.
Thanks, mate. Well, absolutely. It's great to have you on here. And like I said, you know, I think those words couldn't be truer, Steve. You really are a legend of the musky industry. And the thing is that you're such a humble guy, man. I mean, literally, folks that know you, you're very humble, although you catch really, really, really big fish.
Well, you know, I don't know about humble's the word, but
Well, you seem you've got that.
I just try to be me, do what I love to do. You know, help people as much as I can, be as good as they can be. You know, try and put them on fish. I try to learn something every day that I'm on the water, and you know, try and just instill in people primarily the idea that it's not so much magic words, although we all know there can seem to be those at certain times. It's more, you know, it's more keeping an open mind and you know, keep an open mind while you're out on the water, and just, you know, there's a lot of things out there in the books and magazines and videos and everything, but it's amazing how for everything that's supposed to be, you know, by the book, there's always an opposite, it seems like. And
Oh, absolutely.
Keep your mind open to that, you know, to that aspect, and I think you'll always be a better musky fisherman.
Absolutely. And Steve, I think you said something that's very interesting to me. I mean, you and it's so easy to see in your career. And you're still very much you know, in your career right now, which is amazing to me. But you have a passion for what you do. I mean, it speaks in what you do, in your actions. But you have a passion for this industry. I mean, it's amazing. How many years have you been at what you're, you know, at it?
I've actually been, you know, getting in the boat with people, you know, as a major part of my living since '85.
Wow.
So, what is that, 85, 95, you know, 30 plus years, you know.
That's incredible. And just a couple, so I know, you know, a lot of folks that listen to my podcast or listen to other podcasts, you've been on a gazillion podcasts, you've been on television shows, you've been on radio. I mean, you've been all over the place, Steve. But just a couple questions that I have that I think I find very interesting. Tell me a little bit about your past. How did you, I mean, to me, when I think of early Steve Herbeck, and I may be wrong, but I think of Boulder Junction. I mean, Boulder Junction, I mean, you had, you know, back, I don't know when, maybe I'd love to hear a little bit about it. You know, you put a lot of muskies on the number one, you know, at least, you know, for sure, many muskies in the top 10 Vilas County Muskie Marathon back in the day. I mean, how did you get to Boulder Junction? I mean, when did your guiding career really take off in northern Wisconsin, and then, you know, just kind of take us through a little bit?
Well, you know, I mean, it originally started down in the Madison area, and at that time it was all hybrids, and it was a, you know, very up-and-coming beginning type of fishery, and everybody, musky clubs and everything, were all curious about it, and so, you know, I started doing seminars, people wanted to hear about it. That kind of is what got me going, and I was, you know, just so much, you know, I was just always trying to get out of work to go fishing, and I just knew I had to do something, or I wasn't going to be making a living. So, and all I could think about, eat, sleep, breathe, was fishing muskies, and you know, the metro stuff is good. I'm even fishing it some now in certain times of the year, and it's even, you know, I know you fish the Eagle chain a lot. Well, to me, the Madison chain, despite it being, you know, a metro fishery, which isn't the Northwoods aesthetic-wise. Let's face it.
Yeah, yeah.
Country is like Eagle River on steroids. You know,
Really?
As far as numbers of fish, but also a chance at some really good fish too. You know, so that's where it started. But my love was always, you know, up north, and you know, I spent quite a bit of time hanging around and bugging Joe and Tony and those guys were my heroes back when I was younger, and really they kind of gave me, you know, they just instilled in me what I wanted to do, and they gave me the push that they really thought that I could do it. And so I packed up a wife and a young baby and spent the first year or two living out of a camper trailer at Camp Holiday, you know, and God bless her soul. And it's probably the reason my kid is the fisherman he is now.
Oh yeah, Danny is Danny's incredible.
There was just, you know, back then I just always say, I always say I had more balls than I had brains. To do what I did was just purely because I loved it, lived it, breathed it, slept it, everything. And, you know, that's just, when you have that desire to do something, back then I just thought I could do anything I set my mind to. You know what I'm saying? And,
yeah, absolutely.
And I think that is something that, you know, people have to understand that if you want to become a really good musky fisherman, it's not always going to be easy. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You know, it takes a lot of time. It takes time on the water. You know, nowadays things are accelerated, you know, with all the different avenues of information and equipment advances and stuff like that, but still, nothing.
So
absolutely nothing replaces time on the water and thinking about what you're doing. I always tell people the most important thing in your boat is not attached to it or in your tackle box. It's what's between your ears.
That is a very, very true statement, and especially given, like you said, in light of all of the technology that's become available now, sometimes it can be underplayed, the importance of truly being a hunter. You know, using your instincts, spending time, you know, honing your craft. I mean, that's something that kind of...
time on the water gives you that little... I mean, you can read about it and that, but until that light bulb goes off, and you make an instinctive decision to make a move or to make a change, and you're rewarded with a big fish, does the light bulb really go off, and you start getting that? You know what I mean? And then with more time on the water, more experiences, and more of these types of decisions, it just becomes second nature. You don't really, until it's over with, a lot of times you don't realize the decision you made until you sit there. Like every night I sit back and I try and reflect on the day and where I went right, where I went wrong, you know, and you know, I think that's really important. I've always learned, I believe, a heck of a lot more on my days when I was kicking myself in the butt because it was a tough day than I did on the days where, you know, things just happen so easily and the fish are moving good and you're catching fish. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Steve, to that point, interesting question for you. I mean, can you remember back either maybe a recent catch or maybe something a long time ago where you had that light bulb go off, or either you caught a fish or you had a day where you said, "Wow, this is you're again over a 40-year career now." I mean, can you remember a moment where you really had something happen where you said, you know, holy crap, I just learned something really important about chasing big fish, or about whatever it might be that really, like, you know, transitioned yourself as an elite musky angler? Because, I mean, you know, again, we can say it takes time to become an elite musk angler. Obviously, it doesn't happen overnight. But was there like is there a moment or a fish you can remember where something clicked and you said, wow, like that changed me?
Well, you know, most of the big fish I've caught, to be honest with you, and I've caught quite a few fish, and don't get me wrong, I consider guiding a fish when I caught a fish as much as fish that were actually on the end of my line, because to be honest, I could count on my hands the times that I go out to fish on my own. Like when I came back this fall to last fall and this season to fish primarily northern Wisconsin because of my health issues and because of COVID that just didn't leave Canada a viable option. I was out quite a bit by myself, but I was never casting. When I was out by myself, I was doing nothing but running lakes, checking things against what I had experienced 30 years ago in the northern Wisconsin lakes.
Wow.
You know,
Steve, that's cool, man.
Trying to compare my memories and of what was 30 years ago as to now, and light bulbs were really popping off, because to be honest, people talk about how good it was 30 years ago or whatever in northern Wisconsin, and I don't know. You know what I'm saying? You have a tendency to remember the good days and not the days that you busted your butt and nothing happened, or, you know, I mean, I can remember back when I was a maniac and fishing, you know, 18 hours a day, couple shifts a day, you know, and yes, I had some great catches in that, but I'm not right on the threshold of that right now at 30 years later. I'll be honest with you, a lot of the lakes that I fished 2020, last year, 2021. And you got to remember, I was fishing between southern Wisconsin and northern Wisconsin. So I was doing a lot of bouncing around, like fishing, you know, 10 to 15 days each a month, so I could be close to home.
Mm-hmm.
I could have my doctor appointments, and yet still fish. So I was timing where I was fishing a lot according to that.
Mm-hmm.
And also I was trying to do the hottest part of the months in the furthest north as I could, just because of the way the trends are the last few years of hot water temps and things like that.
Certainly.
So, and one thing that I found was that most of the lakes that I were some of my favorites for big fish were not numbers lakes, obviously, but they actually looked healthier to me now.
Wow.
Than they did back then. I mean, weed lines remember that was during the heyday of the crawfish.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'm going to call it pandemic. And a lot of the lakes, there's some places that the weeds were disappearing back then, that they were still gone now, okay? But there were many places that they were gone that were unbelievably good now. And not only that, but and not that it's all good, but the different types of weeds, like the milfoil and the coontail and the cabbage combinations, made and sandgrass. There's a lot of places I found sandgrass, you know, that was really deep, and maybe I just wasn't looking for it quite as much back then. But I mean, there's a lot of places you see 3 and 4 stage transitions from a milfoil cabbage mix to coontail to sandgrass, from 4 or 5, 3 to tobacco cabbage at 3 to 5 feet, to broadleaf green cabbage mixed in with coontail out to 10, 12, and then you got coontail from 12 to 15, 16, 18, and then all of a sudden you got sandgrass out there at over 20 to 24. I saw that in a lot of places, and I think that's what a lot of people are missing nowadays.
So you think? So would you say that these lakes, so compared to 30, like over the last 3 decades, you're finding that your big fish lakes have essentially improved structure-wise as far as the weed growth and a lot of other things?
And I think also the fishery is on a timetable to be much better also, as far as size-wise.
Now, see, that's something I want to ask you about.
You have to remember that there was a lot of thumping going on to as recent as 12, 15 years ago. A lot of 40-inch fish in papers, and a lot of taxidermists now won't even do a skin mount unless it's like an accidental
sure
kind of death of a fish. They're doing what they. I think it's easier to do reproductions. They probably make more money, and it's not.
Absolutely.
But they're also trying to help preserve the resource. But in talking with a lot of people that I respect, and then what I saw last fall or last 2 years, fall, then last year, because I was only up in northern Wisconsin for September and October 2 years ago, and it was just very apparent in August that the Canada was just not going to open, right? And and I was doing my treatments and stuff through the summer, and I was going to be good to go August, September, October if the border opened, and it did. So I booked myself up for September and October in northern Wisconsin. And then last year, I wasn't going to take the chance. It was so iffy. I mean, I had treatments twice a month. It was so iffy month to month if the border was going to open that there's no way I could just do it anymore. You know what I mean? I had to make a choice, and I thought, what a great challenge. Again, I really missed it. I got to fish with a whole lot of people that I used to fish with years ago that, because of various reasons, just can't get into Canada anymore.
Absolutely.
And so I got to spend a lot of time with people like that. And a lot of guys that just wanted to spend time with me, knew me well over the years, and I was just so, for 25, 28, almost 30 years, I was strictly fishing Canada. I mean, that's just where I was,
Absolutely.
And so it was pretty neat. I got to fish with a lot of good guys and stuff. But getting back to I bounce around a lot.
I'm enjoying it, Steve. You're a wealth of knowledge.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
You're a wealth of knowledge.
But I think what you're going to see is, I think in the next, and in talking to people, watching Facebook posts, pictures from the last 5 to 8 years, for the limited amount of time that I was up there, I mean, I didn't get to many lakes that I wanted to get to, just because I would be guiding down here. I'd have one day off to get a treatment, and then take off for north. I had very little time to scout, so the amount of time that I got around was limited. Okay, as far as actually scouting and checking shit out, making sure it was good. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I contacted some really nice fish. You know what I'm saying? I didn't get any 54s or 40 pounders, but I got a lot of nice fish that, 44 to 51 inches. You know what I'm saying? And actually way more than under 44. But I wasn't fishing for 3 to 5 fish a day. You know what I
True,
mean? That
true.
wasn't my gigs. You know.
Now,
I mean,
Steve, here's a question for you. Now, this is, and
but
you
what
are.
I was going with the Chaz is I believe those people that love the Northwoods of Wisconsin will see in the next 5 to 8, 10 years moving forward. Granted, the stocking isn't as good as people would like it. You know, I think there's something beautiful about some of the Wisconsin strains, particularly some of the lakes that I'm fishing aren't being hardly stocked. They're still the original strains, so they're still the big, beautiful brown fish. You know, big, heavy body fish.
Yeah.
But what I think you're going to see is, a lot more average size, really good fish in the mix of that 44 to 48 inch, and then, you know, some nice bigger fish. You know, a buddy of mine got a beautiful monster 54 incher last year, Wisconsin fish.
Holy cow!
Easy. A fish that anybody would have been proud of in the biggest big fish waters in Canada, including eagles. So there's fish out there like that, but you got to realize this guy's fishing, you know, sometimes a week, almost day and night.
Without action,
like,
yeah.
And so they deserve it. You know what I mean? But and that's sometimes what people got to realize. That's what it takes. You know, I found it very difficult to find people to fish after dark as much as we used to back in the day. You know, back in the late 80s and early 90s, when we bet, you know, those of us that were really successful at numbers of good fish, was a lot of it, except for late fall and early first part of the season, was done after dark, unless a storm was coming in or something. So, you know, people will fish dusk and then a little bit after dark, but not many people were willing to start at dark and fish until, you know, mid you know, AM hours, you know.
The Musky Therapy Podcast is brought to you by Joe Bucher Outdoors, #1 in big game fish products, and by Recon Boats, made by craftsmen, built for fishermen.
Got her. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a tough shift if you're not acclimated to night fishing.
Yeah.
But Steve, I got a question for you, and this is something that's it's within this realm we're talking. And I think you're the perfect guy for this question because of your experiences. And this is something that in the very brief times I talked to Tony Rizzo, and it's obviously been written in Secrets of a Musky Guide and all of his books. Tony would talk about, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this, because now you fished through all these eras. Tony talked about, you know, during the catch and kill eras, during like the 70s, 80s, maybe you'd call early 90s. You know, we had some really, really, really heavy fish in northern Wisconsin being harvested, and so there were a lot of fish, like you said, a lot of 40s being thumped. You know, now we you know, for the last, let's say, 2.5 decades, we have had this beautiful catch and release fishery. But do you see the size caliber, or do you anticipate seeing the size caliber that you experienced as a guide back in the 80s that we will now experience back in the 2022? How is catch and release? Do you think we're still going to run into the size caliber? And I know we are. I mean, obviously Minnesota just produced a state record.
Well,
there's
okay now. You know, see, we remember those big fish that I caught, right?
Yeah.
That were boated out of my boat. Okay, but at that time they were the biggest of the year in the whole state. Okay, that fish my buddy just caught this year at 54.5 was the biggest that I know that was caught in the inland waters of the state. So why? What, you know what I'm saying? It's not that there was the year, you know, Tony caught one of his biggest. The year Joe caught the refrigerator. Those were the biggest in the state. It's not like they were falling like dominoes everywhere.
So are you saying more so?
People only remember those big fish and think that's the way it was. Those were still needle in the haystack fish.
Interesting. So would you? Now I don't, put you on the spot, but would you say that even with our great catch and release, and I would hope this is the case, that even with catch and release now, we still have the potential to produce giants like we did 30 some years ago.
Well, there was a giant caught bigger than as big as any fish that I know of, caught in inland waters, this last year. And so, I saw 2 fish in June that I chased every chance that I was up through the season that were as big as anything I would have eaten supper with in Canada to be after.
So the reason I was asking is I think there's a general, and I'm not saying that I believe this. I'm just curious to ask you. I think there's a general consensus that like catch and release is producing bodies of water with lots of muskies, but perhaps lower, but smaller average size, like big muskies. We're not getting
I don't know about that,
and that's exactly. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't know about that. I think if anything, maybe some stockings of some types of genetics have maybe diluted some excellent original strains to some point, but I don't see no fisheries that are so full of fish that you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I would just, because it's...
Let me play some fish, boy. I could sure use another 50% population in there. But, I think a lot of it is these fish are exploited a little bit more intelligently. I think they're a little bit different than these people can't. Well, I hate seeing comparisons between northern Wisconsin and Minnesota. They're not apples and oranges.
No, very different, right?
Their lakes are different. We don't have a lake, unless you're talking Green Bay, which I'm not including in that in inland waters.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just they're not the same. We don't have a lake. Our biggest lake isn't as big as the smallest, lake that everybody's targeting these big stock fish on. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's not the same. It's not the same. I mean, where we fish up there, it's like, you're never further than 3 to 5 miles from a totally different type of body of water that can completely change the way you're fishing for that day, according to its makeup and the conditions that you're facing. So there's beauty in that. One thing that I really saw that was really cool is, I was so fortunate to be able to fish Eagle Lake for so many years, and truly big fish water and such a diverse body of water. It has within it everything from gin clear water to coffee-colored slop and everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all natural fish, okay? But for me to fish different types of patterns, a lot of times I would need to make pretty extreme changes in lake sections. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whereas like, for me to go from fishing up in the slop or weed edges to a real deep sandgrass edge, or to fish suspended fish, all I had to do was turn my boat around and move 50 yards, or go a quarter of a mile out to the middle of the lake to fish deep, hard-bottomed areas, or suspended fish. It was so simple, and the beauty of it was so easy before I even made a lake change, which is so easy and simple. I could be on a deep, clear lake, at certain times of the day, and the weatherman was wrong, and I could make a change, to something a little greener or darker within a matter of 15 minutes. You know what I mean? And that's some of the beauty of northern Wisconsin is the diversity of the lakes. And what I think people are going to see is, I think you're going to see, I'm not saying, oh my God, there's going to be 40 pounders everywhere in northern Wisconsin, but I think you're going to see a very distinct in the next 10 years, because it takes a while. Okay, I think it's starting. From what I remember seeing progressively on pictures in the and stuff for people, and also social media and everything else, and talking with the vast number of really good fishermen I know and stuff like that. And then what I saw the last 2 years, and I was surprised. I got to hold a couple really, really nice fish that I was really, really proud of. Actually half a dozen of them. And I think if a person makes it his goal that you're don't need to catch 5 fish a day, and you fish smart and you fish hard and you fish the right lakes and do your research, on what lakes have been producing these kind of fish or have the capabilities is all.
Well,
because a lot of times the best lakes for big fish are not being fished very hard.
So maybe, Steve, a question for you is you are, and ladies and gentlemen listening, I mean, I think there's no doubt that Steve Herbeck is synonymous with big fish, and that is one of the legacies you're going to leave behind, Steve, many years from now is you're a big fish guy. What would you tell? So let's say we're talking big fish here. How would you coach someone? Let's say someone really is they've caught their fair share of 40-inch fish. They're gaining experience, but now they want to start tapping into big fish. And how would you coach someone to start making that transition? Because you've kind of started hitting on a couple of things. You're like, okay, there's a certain type of lake, and you got to be prepared mentally for this and for that. Like, how did you make that transition? Because I mean, you're known for big fish, man. How do you do it? Like, what's your, without obviously naming lakes,
In this day and age, obviously, the simplest way is like what some of your top guys are doing, and they're just running from hot fishery to hot fishery as they mature and then move on as they, thin out, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And we could name a couple of those lakes.
Minnesotas, you got your St. Clairs, you got Canada, you got Green Bay. If all you want to do is just catch big fish, that's the simplest way. It's very simple to see where you should be. And there's many, many good guys that are fishing those waters that they're catching a lot of big fish simply because they are there. Okay.
So then I want to dial this back in a little bit.
Now, when it comes to if you want to stay and you love your northern Wisconsin scenery, it's hardly anything like it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, the feel, my heart still races when I hit the upper stretches of 51 and start going to M and B and K and
that's awesome, man.
Some of those roads, my heart just races like the old days 30 years ago.
That's amazing.
The anticipation and the excitement. So, if you want to stay there, which I could have gone anywhere I wanted to till Canada opened, but I wanted to be where it started for me. I remembered those days of excitement of those were the days of pioneer stuff. People were coming up with new stuff all the time. How many things that are now common that people are writing and over and talking about like it's just new. I see people talking about open water fishing like it's something new. For crying out loud, we were doing it 35 years ago, almost religiously casting, you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's advancements in it and stuff like that, but it's just, it's easy to just think that you have a chance at every lake, and that's just not the case, you know what I mean? You have to pick and look at lakes that have a history of producing big fish, and there's plenty of them in northern Wisconsin, and a lot of those have original strains still in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you just have to realize that it's much like the guy who transitions from soup buck hunting to trophy buck hunting. And you have to be willing to put in your time. You have to be willing to do your research and your homework on when to be where. That, to be honest with you, one thing that I learned from northern Wisconsin, and that can be translated to any place in different realms. So even though it's a huge Canadian lake, or I'm sure even on Lake St. Clair or on Green Bay or any of these things, it's just in a different form versus 1,500 lakes in a 50-mile circle like in Vilas County, right? Or in Sawyer County or any of the northern Wisconsin counties. The key, one of the major keys of the most successful fishermen is because of experience, whether it is not only just their own, but what people have been willing to give them, and they've been able to research, and what they've been able to experience is knowing when to be where. And that is
it's the hunting instinct. Yes.
It's knowing what lake to be on, at what conditions, what wind conditions, what time of the year, because all the lakes or categories of lakes have certain windows when they are the very best for the season, and it's usually 2 weeks, a 2-week window every lake, and then every once in a while for some reason a lake will just be on for a year or two, you know, and but just historically, most lakes have a 2 or 3 week window, maybe two 2-week windows of the whole year, when they may be good the whole year, but that's when they're their very best.
The very best.
And for some reason, historically, that's when the big fish over the years have been caught on. And those are the kind of things that people really need to research too in their quest to learn what lakes they need to learn to be on, and to keep in the back of their mind, you know, that instinct time to make a move during the course of a day. Oh, I got to make a move. You know, whether it's structurally or pattern-wise or lake change. And I think those are the keys, you know, that have really brought light bulbs to me. Is when most of the fish that I've caught, I didn't realize the light bulbs went off until it happened. But I realized, man, I did make that change. And then it becomes much more apparent. You can't make yourself think it. It happens. You know, and it's because of your time on the water, and because you're not just out there enjoying the day, which that's part of musky fishing. But, you know, let's face it, there's a different whole gig to musky fishing. You know, unless you're a sadistic type of a person, you know, there's more to musky fishing than just pure physical enjoyment. It's the, you know, like I said, I love to fish everything, but muskies are the only ones that make me shake. You know,
Steve, you made me. I wrote down a question here. I got a couple of things you mentioned that I really like, but I have a question for you, and this is something that I have pondered the answer to. You're talking about that you reminded me of this when you were talking about lakes that have a prime time. They're always good, but they have certain prime times to fish them, and this and that. And this is something I know both of us as guides have experienced, and you more so than I have. But I want to get your thought on this. I'm going to give you just this is a scenario, and I'm thinking of a lake. I'm not going to say the lake name. You've probably fished this lake in your 30-some year musky career. But there was a lake, and I've noticed this with a lot of lakes actually, where this is an interesting question because of a couple of reasons. I've got a particular system, let's say a lake. It's a good sized lake. We're not talking like a hole in the wall here. We're talking a nice lake, and I can remember thinking to this particular lake. I guided on it for at least like a 5-year period, and it was knocking. For me, back, I don't know, a decade or so ago, maybe 15 some years ago, it was knocking like at least 2 good fish out a day for clients, and that was like an average. It was 2 good fish, and I had a 5-year stretch on this body of water. That was it was a I'd say it was my back pocket lake. I'd go to bed, and I know I could bring clients out there and catch fish. And then and now, Steve, I haven't visited that lake and really seriously musky fished that particular lake I'm thinking of in probably 10 years, and it just stopped. And I'm curious now, and again, I tried for a couple years, and I left and I moved to a different body of water. Is that because the muskies obviously didn't die, and the lake's got big muskies in it? Is this a shift in the ecosystem? Did these muskies now, have they changed from shallow water feeding, or are they moving out over open water and that's their primary forage? Like, have you experienced this on lakes you fished? What is going on in that situation?
No, I think that would be a very good, easy explanation. I think that some of these classic lakes that had not only numbers of fish but big fish, we're probably talking very close to the same body of water, although I'm not going to bring up names right now either. But there's more than one lake like this, okay? I think because of lack of stocking, I think that what you can find out a lot of this through DNR's netting records too, although they aren't always, and stocking records and history. But you got to be a little careful on netting records because I don't believe that they're very accurate. And I think that's what gave me some of my good fish this year, because people were looking at stuff like that and thought lakes were no good anymore.
Interesting.
I think what you find is a lower population of fish, but good average sized fish. And let's face it, good average sized fish in the mid to upper 40-inch fish in northern Wisconsin are a little different breed of fish than in some other parts of the country or Canada. Okay, I think they don't probably, when you don't have, it's harder to pin down patterns, so you have to have faith in your instincts to stick with it, and then a big fish happens. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think, and I was very surprised at a couple bodies of water that I thought that I caught some really good fish on this year, would be really busy. And it almost seemed, I can't remember 30 years ago when I hardly ever saw such few fishermen on these lakes 30 years ago as I did the last 2 falls. Okay, and I only caught a couple fish that were, mid 30-inch fish. Most of the fish were big, beautiful fish in that 42 to 50-inch range, 49-inch range. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I never got pushed around. I had no problems finding parking. I just couldn't believe it. The same lake 30 years ago, many times I had to park 300-400 yards from the boat landing.
Wait, really? So you're saying nowadays these lakes that you used to park so far away, you're not, you can, it's piece of cake to find parking. Why? What the? Really?
Yeah, to be honest, the type of stuff that I saw on lakes was not as much fishing pressure as it was just gray hairs driving pontoons around drinking martinis and stuff. You know what I'm saying? I didn't see near as the fishing pressure is just a lot of people pressure. You know what I mean? And that's not the same. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just gotta pretend they aren't there.
So let me ask you this then, Steve. And this is something I heard you say at a seminar over 10 years ago, and I want to just lead into this because you're talking about fishing. We're talking about fishing pressure, and obviously with COVID, at least where we fish in northern Wisconsin quite a bit, there's definitely an uptick in fishing pressure the last couple of years. You mentioned this in a seminar a long time ago. You said that pressure and technology, the technology available at people's fingertips now, which is amazing stuff. But you said something, and I maybe I'm misquoting you, but I remember you saying something along the lines of the technology that people have combined with the fishing pressure, the increase of fishing pressure, has changed the way that muskies relate to structure. And I don't want you to maybe divulge obviously all your secrets, but I remember you saying some really interesting things in this seminar. This is like a decade ago, and I think you were talking about fishing on Eagle Lake, and how your patterns had changed very drastically because of your experiences with anglers that could like pull up a map on their Humminbird or their Lowrance and say, okay, I'm going to go fish this reef. Whereas 30 years ago.
A lot of the problem was because 25 years I made out 25 maps a day or a week for everybody as part of the way. part of our philosophy at Andy Myers was, that's what we did was what made us different than a lot of your resorts,
But how did that change your attack to fishing when you had to get clients on fish and you're competing against other anglers? How did that change your?
There's certain spots are always good spots, regardless of how much pressure is on them, because they're in travel avenues, travel lanes that the fish are using their migrations around the lake, that bait fish using their migrations around the lake. You got to remember, a lot of these basins are almost like big whirlpools. When a wind blows a certain way, people don't realize how there's a rotational current that goes around or through these from narrows to narrows, with basins in between and things. So bait fish have migrational patterns according to winds and currents, and though it's not a river system, people don't realize just how much currents make a big difference in many lakes on just how fish move around them. Okay, so fish are always going to stop at some of these places. Now, do they become more educated? I would say yes, but another thing is they don't live. What people don't realize is on these spots, they don't live on these spots. They stop there. Okay, so there's constantly different fish stopping at them as they move around the lake. Okay, the movements are less the smaller the lake. You know what I'm saying? So it becomes the smaller the basin or section of the lake or lake itself is, the more fishing pressure becomes a factor in the conditioning mode. Okay, because there's fewer spots, fewer areas, and the more frequently they're going to stop at that same spot that's getting pounded. So I made it a point that every day I would always try and fish a new spot. Okay, now secondary spots is what I call these spots that aren't like been known for 50 years or 100 years or whatever. You know what I mean? The go-to spots on any map, the go-to spots that everybody has marked on their map that their buddies told them, that this guy told him, that somebody else told him. Okay, now the thing about secondary spots is that why weren't they as well known as the primary spots or the community spots? It's because fish don't make their stops there as often through the course of the season. Okay, so what you have to do is you may have to take these secondary spots that some of them look as good or better than some of the primary spots. But what makes them not as quite as good all the time, like some of these other spots, some of these other spots are good at all times of the year, other than maybe right after spawning. You know, I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm thinking of some right now. I'm thinking of,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, so these secondary spots, what happens is you may fish them 2 or 3 times and don't see a fish and you give up on them.
It's so true.
Okay?
That's so true, Steve.
You have to fish them all the time for several seasons until you find out that all of a sudden it's this time of the year, it's under this type of a wind, it's this part time of the season that now I consistently see fish on this spot. And that's when you get that into your repertoire, into your book of knowledge of spots, and then all of a sudden you got a whole bunch of spots for all different kinds of year that other people are fishing a lot. Until you guide on them a whole bunch of times and you show a whole bunch of people, and then you got to keep finding more spots because they become, in a sense, all of a sudden become secondaries, not secondary spots, but primary spots. But what they don't know is a lot of the time they're fishing them, they shouldn't be there. I think it's really important on big fish spots, whether it's a primary spot or a secondary spot, is to resist pounding them at unopportune times. That you need to hold off when you know a big fish is on a spot, or that it has the capabilities of holding big fish consistently, is to leave it alone. No matter, it's your thoughts are, I gotta be there, somebody else is going to get there before me, ta-da-da-da. But they can be. Fish, I don't care how good a fisherman you think you are. Big fish go where they want to go.
Now, Steve, that's a really, you hit something inside me there, because this is something that I think about quite a bit. And there's an anxiety factor involved in this, where I know I've got a big fish spot, and I know it's going to hold a big fish. Let's say we've got ideal conditions. We're on a new moon period, moon down, storm. I don't know. Let's just say conditions are good, but I got a moon phase at a certain time of the day. And you're saying, and I agree with you. I just think it's hard sometimes to resist going and checking occasionally when you know someone else can sneak in there. And that's it's difficult to do on pressured waters.
Most certainly. But I can't tell you how many times I've sat and watched people fish a spot through the course of the day. Now, granted, if you're fishing them at the times that you're talking about, those are the times that I'm talking.
Yeah, you want to be there at those times, but don't sneak in there.
Unfortunately, 10 years ago, not many people figured all these factors in. They just figured, it's a dark day, or a storm is coming up, and that's good, which it is. But when you start putting the other factors in that now everybody has right on their phone and everything else, and has right at their fingertips, it becomes more difficult for sure, but it also becomes easier for you. You know what I'm saying? But
absolutely.
That's what I'm talking about. Now, 15, 10, and 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, those kind of, only a few people really in-depthly were aware of all those different factors. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So that's what I'm talking about. That's some of the things that I'm talking about. And sometimes, there's more to it. There's that inner thought, that inner instinct, and because you've been there so many times and a number of times, and the wind is just right, and and it's how you fish a spot. A lot of times, people, they talk wind, and when you're fishing wind and where on a spot, and they don't realize what wind really does to a spot, because they fish only where they think the wind is pounding is the place to be, and they don't take into account the wind sliding down the side, and so that leaves a whole section of 100 yards of a structure to me alone, because I saw the current edge. I knew there were pine needles, there were leaves, there were sud lines going down the side of a shoreline or or an island point, and the wind was pounding out on the tip, and yes, I fished that, but didn't see nothing. And the other 5 or 6 boats through the course of the day fished that because that spot has produced fish. But because of pressure, because of current that was pounding, creating, that wind was creating current that the fish didn't want to deal with anymore after a day or so, they had slid into a different part of the structure. It's things like that, and that's what time on the water tells you.
So, Steve, I don't want to keep you too long tonight. I have one more. I have 2 things I want to ask you, and one of these, and you kind of were just hitting on this, but I'm curious to hear this because this is something that I just you said it, and I don't think it gets talked about like really at all. You talked about like baitfish migrational patterns and rotational currents, wind currents, but baitfish migrational patterns. And you kind of hit on this. This is kind of bringing this full circle because at the beginning of our podcast, you said, hey, Chaz, I spent these days on the water in northern Wisconsin, but when I was fishing by myself, I wasn't even fishing. I was just scouting. You were only scouting. You weren't casting. And then you talk about this baitfish migrational patterns. Can you talk a little bit, just maybe briefly about your thought process as far as scouting and baitfish migration? I don't know, just in a generalized statement. It's a really interesting thing.
Going back to that, I mean, like for me, I can pretty much tell when I'm running a lake, an icon net where I want to start. Now, obviously, as I fish it, I'll constantly be learning, some of the things that we have been talking about and adding to it. But I find that I don't like learning a lake fishing it because I never get to all the places that I want to see. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I don't fish when I scout a lake. Now, don't get me wrong. Once I start fishing it, I'm always scouting. It's just in a different way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I took some of the lakes that I fished 30 years ago, went out on them, and iconed them, saw what I needed to see as far as what structures, looked like, how I thought that the stuff that I should be fishing for that time of the season, and guided them the next day and caught good fish. So, I think that, and I did it on a couple lakes I only had fished very little 30 years ago. But since I'd spent so much time on big fish water on Eagle, I learned a lot also that translated in a micro sense, like concentrated sense to these smaller lakes. You know what I mean? It made it almost like simple.
Interesting.
You know what I'm saying? Because
I don't know.
You got 80 miles of lake with 80 million spots that all look good. Well, that's not the case on most of these 500 to 1,000, 1,500 acre lakes in northern Wisconsin. It's like a miniature thing that's so easy to read when you spend time on very multi-dimensional and sectional lakes. So that kind of gave me an advantage,
That's cool. That's very interesting.
And then not only that, but I know a few people. So don't be afraid to get whatever information you can, and I think it's really important that when you get information like that really helps you for people to really respect it. I think some of that's lacking in this day and age, the way information is shared. I'm not saying be tight-lipped, because if there's anybody that shares things more than me, I'd like to see them, but I'd be very careful on stuff that good friends have showed me, and I make it very clear to people when I'm fishing it that it shouldn't be, yes, use it for your, because otherwise I wouldn't have brought you here, but it's not for the whole general public,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Steve, I've got you. I know I've had you on for a while now. It's an hour or some here, and I literally am enjoying myself so much. But I don't want to keep you forever. But I do want to ask you this. And this is something, there's no way, folks listening, we can't have Steve Herbeck online here with us on the podcast without asking this question, because this is a childhood thing for me, Steve. I mean, because Steve, here I am. I'm 34 years old, but I've grown up, and that's the funny. And I'm not implying you're an old guy. You're not an old guy, but I'm just saying you've been around the block, and man, I remember growing up, and you told me this story as a kid, and I would love to hear this. And maybe this leads to a conversation, maybe it doesn't. I don't know where this is going to go, but I want to hear this, because this is something that's always been a Steve Herbeck classic to me. And this has been written in books. I believe this is a chapter of yours in the greatest muskie stories ever told, an old muskie hunter classic. Man, this is a Steve Herbeck classic. The biggest muskie, and I still, and this is something maybe to end our podcast talking about this. It makes your head spin. Tell me, Steve, the story, and I'm sure it's like maybe heart-wrenching, the story of the biggest muskie you ever saw. And I remember, I'll lead you in by saying, I remember you telling me you saw the one side of the port side of the boat, and you looked over and you saw the other side of the muskie on the starboard side of the boat. We don't have to talk about where the muskie was or this and that, but I remember you telling this story. I've read the story. I would love to hear a little bit about it. Big fish. I mean, maybe the biggest fish you've ever seen.
By far the biggest, the 3 or 4 biggest fish I've ever seen in my life were encountered. Were all on eagle. Okay. People can say 60-inch fish don't exist. They're full of shit. Okay. Because, I've had 50-pounders in my arms, and these fish dwarfed them.
Really?
How big? Who knows? Okay. The problem of it is you never see them again. It's just like a nightmare, cold sweats. Only one fish that I ever seen more than once, and I'm not sure it was about a mile apart in the same section, and I just believe it had to be the same fish, because it was, on a structure along the same side of the lake. It would have been a natural in its fish's movement, and there's just not fish many. Although I've seen 4 different fish over the course of 30 years that I thought were in that world class range, and they were all except this one fish in the same section. We're in 3 different sections of the lake. So I find that hard to believe that they were different fish, that they weren't different fish, except for those 2 encounters in the same section of the lake. Only once have I ever had a fish similar to that actually hooked that big. And that wasn't me, that was a client, and it was in the fall. I was running a nice live bait. We were casting up onto a reef, and he snagged up on the reef on a bulldog. And so I eased the boat nose first. Wind was pounding into that side of the tip of the reef. I eased the boat nose first up, where in this structure, like less than half a cast away.
Steve, my heart's racing right now.
Less than half a cast away, we're in 28, 30 feet of water, and to zero. You know what I'm saying? Waves were breaking on the top of this edge, and the wind had been coming across the lake. There was a lot of staging fish. It was at the end of October, and I reeled my live bait up because I knew we were going to rapidly be in shallow water, and I didn't want to snag it. Live baits up there are at a premium, you know what I mean? Just getting your hands. The truck doesn't pull in after they netted them out of a pond, you know what I'm saying? It takes a lot of hard work to get them and stuff like that. So I reeled it up, and luckily as I sat the rat down, I pushed the clicker button, the release button. And as I got the boat up to the edge of the reef, and he was jerking to get his bulldog off, I just, for some reason, I looked over the corner of my shoulder, And here's a fish that looked, all I can describe it as, I had no way of measuring it or anything like that. It was huge. It reminded me almost perfectly of the bench on a picnic table.
Jeez.
The bench seat on a picnic table. Rose up out of it, couldn't have been. Now, I don't know how far back that fish had been looking up and seeing that sucker right below the surface. It was right off the corner of the boat, you know. I mean, an 8-foot rod was more than halfway in the boat for me to feel comfortable with it not falling out of the boat, right? So it's right off the corner of the boat at the end of my 4-foot leader, right? Just swimming 6 to 8 inches under the surface, trying to make sure it stays alive, didn't get snagged, you know. And this fish, I don't know how far out this fish had seen that and then rose up, or it just came right up off of 4 to 6 feet, 4 or 5, at the most 4 or 5 feet of water. It just rose up, slow motion, and just took that bait sideways, and all you could see was, you know, the gill plates of the sucker and the tip of the tail sticking out the side of each side of its mouth. It just effortlessly just clamped down on it, turned, and started swimming for the middle of the lake. And just slow. Clickers would click, 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 click. Just no zipping, no zzz, just slowly, purposely, no worries, no nothing. And I quick-handed the rod off. And this guy's a big guy. I've seen him horse 30-pound fish like bass, you know. and I remember telling him, I said, she's perfect. It's perfect. Hit her. And he swung on her, and when he hit her, the rod bent good, but I heard the drag go zzz, and I said, put your thumb on the spool, hit her again. And just as he put his thumb on the spool, that fish bolted for the center of the lake. He must have stuck her that first time. And she bolted for the center of the lake. His thumb was on the spool. It went underneath that crossbar on top of the reel and peeled his thumbnail right off his thumb.
No.
And 40-pound big game snapped like a rifle. And all I have to say is that it was very, very quiet for most of the rest of the day.
Wait, so it snapped the line?
Yeah. It went off like a rifle shot.
Oh, Steve. Oh, man.
Yeah. So that was the only time I've ever had the chance and opportunity to have a hook into a fish like that. And to be honest, I'll be honest, there's only been a few fish of the really big ones that I boated that I can say I really chased and then caught them. Maybe a handful, you know. Because I've had over 40 fish over 40 pounds in a boat.
Wow.
Okay? And most of them just happened because I was at the right place at the right time, and those kind of structures, you know, can stop big fish out. You know what I mean? And very few of the fish that I really chased did I get, unless I caught them on some other structure and I wasn't aware of it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I mean, that most of the time that I really chased big fish, other than on the same day, you know what I mean? Like we saw them, and then right at dark or storm coming in, we caught them. I'm talking about fish that I chased for days. It's my firm belief that the best chance that you have at a super big old fish is the first day that it moves up on a new structure.
And why, Steve, why do you think, because you said this, and I'm just curious just to pick your brain on this. You said, you know, I saw that fish and you'll never see that fish again. It's a nightmare and you'll get cold sweats. Like, why is that you'll never see that fish again? Like, what is it about their lifestyle?
I think they're different. I think they're different in not only probably the average size fish they eat, how often they have to eat, where they actually inhabit, you know, in the ecosystem. You know, I learned a lot, spent a lot of time rubbing elbows with Larry Ramsell back in the early years up at Annie Myers. Larry was always there, you know, coming up as much as he could, and he was always took me under his wing, and you know, he's a as we all know, he's an encyclopedia of musky information.
Absolutely.
And you know, it was his belief that from the studies that he helped partake in, and that these big fish, you know, were most likely sterile females, so they didn't really have to come in shallow very often.
Really?
They did feel the urgent need to build their eggs late in the fall, which was what people call fattening up for the winter, you know, which is what spurs the fall bite, you know, the late fall bite, particularly the live bait bite, and the trolling bite, the big baits bite, and that these fish probably don't come into where we are fishing as often as fish that are. Remember, these fish are like 1 in a billion. They're genetically different. Not every fish can get to be that big. They're freaks of nature. They're probably sterile females. They're probably very, very old. They just do things differently, methodically. They probably spend a lot of their time either deep or over deeper water where we aren't fishing, and when we are fishing over, they're like an old man on the recliner on the couch. They have very little interest in our baits, actually. You know, when they happen to be where we are actually fishing, because you know we're only fishing less than 5 or 10% of the water on any lake. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
So there's so much out there. To be honest, I think most lakes, if you drained them, it would scare you what's in there. Regardless of what people think, regardless of what the netting surveys show, because those are at very best very inaccurate.
Man,
you know?
Steve, this is getting me fired up, man. Gosh, it's amazing, dude. Big
But
fish
I
talk.
just want to say, those of you that really love the North Woods, I think another good old days of fishing is coming. Maybe not necessarily in pure numbers of fish, but I think in average quality fish that, you know, I think, you know, I'm not going to say 40 pounders are going to be popping, although you're going to see 1 or 2 or 3 of those really big fish a year caught, just like back 30 years ago. You know, remember, a lot of people have left the North Woods and only go to Minnesota and only go to Canada and only go to St. Clair. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, that, you know, that there's very good opportunities there. And I did not see. I was so surprised at the amount of fishing pressure. It just, and a lot of people, especially if Canada closed and stuff, there was a lot of people, don't get me wrong, and there was some days, you know, on weekends and stuff that there was quite, but I never got pushed around, you know, and I felt very comfortable up there. I felt very much at home like the old days, and I loved it. And I think, you know, I'm going to be heading back to Canada this year for August, last week of July, August, and October, and the first week of November. But I can't wait to spend the times that I have booked for June, early July, September, and when I get back the 5th or 6th of November until right before deer season up north. I'm looking forward to it darn near as much as fishing Canada, just because of the way I felt there, and the satisfaction that you get when you catch a really good fish up there is really satisfying. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. Yes.
And they're just, you know, it's just a different breed of animal, and there's doesn't mean that every fish has to be 55, 56 inches to be proud of them.
Darn right about that. Hey, Steve, so before we go, tell the folks a little bit about your seminar schedule coming up. You know, it's only mid-February here, and you're going to be very active I mean, I'm sure folks that are listening are just, I have just enjoyed every minute of our podcast here, but you're going to be speaking in a number of different places coming
I've
up.
got a few of them done already. Unfortunately, I just didn't feel comfortable doing the first couple Muskie shows just because of my personal situation. My cancer is in remission. I'm feeling very, very strong and positive, and looking forward to the coming seasons.
Hell yeah, Steve.
I'm far from finished. Actually, I'll be honest with you. Even though I was under chemotherapy last year, I was fishing the day after chemo, 8 to 10 hours, and a lot of people were quitting before I felt like quitting. So a lot of it's in your mind, and when I'm fishing, and the people that were good enough to believe in me and book me in the last couple seasons with what I've been going through, it's those people and my passion and my love for the sport that got me through this. And I'm almost ready to choke up over it. That's as much as any of the treatments, as much as any of the doctors. I believe wholeheartedly in my life, in my heart, that was a major part of it. So, I just, those things mean a lot to me, and anybody that does get in my boat or wants to, or is at a seminar or something, I'm just like you guys. I put my pants on the same way. I don't think of myself as better than anybody. I'll help anybody any way I can. Anybody that's listening to this, I can be found on Facebook or message me with any questions. I have no problems helping people, not because you're just not paying me. That doesn't mean anything to me. It's all about bringing the sport to its pinnacle even further. And I love talking muskies. I love sharing with people. And that's why I couldn't believe, all the spots I gave out all the years without any recourse at all, and still managed to catch fish. I always wondered, what if I had? but every one that I did catch just made it more worthwhile. How many people came up to me and told me because of what I showed them or what I taught them and stuff, that they caught their biggest fish with true, genuine, appreciation. Really makes it worthwhile, So let's see, I got one coming up in Plymouth the first week. They're listed on my website, steveherbeckfishing.com. I got one coming up I got a couple coming up, one in Plymouth at the Muskies Inc. Club in Plymouth, and then another one with the Rockford Club in May. And let's see, there's another one in March. The Green Bay Club at the Yacht Club. I just didn't feel comfortable doing the big major muskie shows this year yet because, I'm in remission. I'm really feeling strong.
Absolutely.
I'm not super scared of everything that's going on. I go where I want to go. I'm just careful, but I didn't feel like I needed to expose myself and perhaps run myself down if I got real sick in case something comes back and I have to go on treatments again. I want to be able to kick it in the rear end just like I have in the past. And
absolutely.
And I think I'll probably go to the Minnesota show and see everybody. I mean, there's a lot of guys. Those shows are kind of, to us guys that have been in it for many, many years, are kind of like the Mountain Man rendezvous, where we all get together and get to see each other, but then we all split up and go our own ways for the season, and other than a few phone calls to see how things are going here and there, everybody's wrapped up in what they're doing, and I really miss seeing all the guys. I really miss seeing all the people that used to come and see me at every show to talk fishing with me and stuff. So Julian's not at AML's not doing any shows this year because he's just about, he's still got some openings, but he's at this point in the season, he's getting really close to being full because of all the people that put their deposits aside to COVID pass, and just the the popularity of the place, he's not going to do any shows this year, and I think it's going to take a season of getting back into the swing before a lot of the shows are really, really, really worth it anyway. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
They're all fun to be at, but we got to get back into the swing again. People got to feel comfortable about being out. There was a few people got sick at the Chicago show. I heard the Milwaukee show was much better, and I haven't heard of, much of the stuff happening there. So I think we're over the hump, and that's good, and I'm looking for it. I might swing in and say hi to some of the old boys at the Wausau show, and just to say hi and try and keep my wallet in my pocket. So, and I'm talking about some neat stuff at the seminars that I am doing, like I'm talking a lot. I touched on a subject with a podcast with Brad Hoppy on backlash on edges, and everywhere I went, people just kept asking me about it because I brought up so many things people weren't aware of. How and everybody kept asking me about it. Everybody I fished with kept asking me about it. So I thought I should do a seminar on it before I write an article about it. And so it's about edges and the many different kinds of edges that people don't really realize, and what and when and where to look for what edges to be on, and how many different types of edges that are very, very apparent visually and that people are fishing, but how many edges there are that you can't call them non-physical because they are physical, but you just can't see them. So many people don't even understand that they're even available or there, or how much they factor into big fish or any fish, including every type of prey from the most microscopic up to the apex predators, and how they affect their movements and their concentration and their feeding. And it's really kind of a neat, I get fired up every time I do it, because every time I sit back and I get home and I sit back and I start thinking of ones that I even missed, that I've missed. So I see people's eyeballs lighting up like light bulbs as I'm talking about different things, and that's really what brings a lot of enjoyment, fulfillment to me.
Dude, that's awesome, man.
And when you said something about my legacy, which I never think about, I'm just a guy that loves to fish. If people could, and I'm going to be around a long time. Don't get me wrong.
Absolutely.
But if that's something that I could be known for, it's how much I shared, how much I looked into things and taught people how to be more instinctive and thinking fishermen out there, and shared everything I could with people. I think that's probably the most important thing to me.
Wow. Steve, and one other thing, if folks do want to get a hold of you for guiding, I don't know if you have any other, any open spots left.
I got a few things open in early July. I got some stuff open in September.
Cool.
Maybe
awesome.
A couple days in June yet. Towards the end of last half of June, I got some stuff open. I got a couple days in May and a couple days early June in southern Wisconsin either on the river, Lake Wisconsin River, or the Madison Chain, or a couple other lakes that are in our area that I really don't want to mention, unless you're in my boat with me. At this point, it's just gotten to be. The information in stage is great for those guys learning, but man, it's just amazing how things can change so quickly on a guy that's trying to do a good job,
Well, Steve, I got to tell you, man, and I mean this truly from the heart. It's talking with you is like talking to an old friend. Even though you and I know each other here and there over the years, acquaintances, and you and I fished together way back in the day, early 2000s. But talking to you now is like talking to an old friend, and you really are so. I think the best word to describe you, Steve, you're just so genuine, and you are in this business for the right reasons. So many years later, you talk, if I might say, you talked a long time ago on the podcast about changing careers. You were doing some kind of day job, and you said, I got to get into the muskie world. I can't be working this job. Well, you made the right decision, I'm assuming, because here you are 30 some years later, and your love and your zest for muskie fishing and helping others find success in this business is still there for you. It's very evident that that's there, and it's really an absolute honor to have you on the podcast today, man. It really is.
Well, thanks for having me. And if anybody out there's listening wants to get a hold of me, you can find me at my website, steveherbeckfishing.com, my Facebook, my phone number. I'm only a phone call away anytime. There's no bad time, really, to be honest with you. You never bothered me. 608-515-3416.
And I'm going to put that in the description for this podcast, folks. If you want to get a hold of Steve Herbeck, a living legend in the muskie industry and just an all-around amazing person, get a hold of Steve. And Steve, I hope we can have you on the podcast again at some point. And I can't say it enough how much I really enjoyed talking with you this evening.
Well, to be honest, I don't think that we will run out of things to talk about.
I don't think so either. Oh my gosh. Well, folks, I really hope you enjoyed another episode of the Muskie Therapy Podcast. I got to be honest, I feel like I have been to a therapy session here. Talking to you, Steve, has been really amazing tonight. So, folks, I really hope you enjoyed this one. And as always, thanks for listening. See you guys next time.